The first rule of a burning street is that doors lie. They look like exits. They breathe like chimneys. We knocked anyway, because somewhere behind one of them a man was arguing with smoke and losing politely. The raid had come in 2 acts. High explosive first to break the bones, then the little magnesium beast to set the blood alight. Roofs talked in sparks. Glass had finished its sentences already and littered the pavement like a language no one spoke. I had one hand on the stretcher pole and the other around the torch with the slit taped across it, a thin coin of light that made everything honest and small. "Mask up," I told the new lad, and he fumbled the straps the way boys fumble buttons when they finally meet someone kind. We kept the valves dry with spit and stubbornness. I tasted rubber and London and the pennies of my own fear. A warden's whistle pecked 3 notes up the road, collapse risk, so we moved in close to the buildings where the bricks already knew our names. The ambulance waited with its bonnet warm and patient, engine idling low like a promise it meant to keep. Flares hissed at the far end of the street where incendiaries tried to breed. Our sand buckets queued like good citizens. The Stirrup pump coughed and then remembered how London breathes when it must. I hammered the heel of my glove against number 18. "ARP, answer if you can." Smoke answered first, rolling its shoulders through the letter slot. A voice followed, wet and tired. "Top landing. One can't walk." We went in because there is no second verb to that sentence. Inside, the hallway had learned to crawl. Smoke goes low when it's thinking. We went lower. I counted steps by touch, skirting board, banister post. The missing tread I'd logged on a quiet day because buildings confess if you listen to them often enough. Hands on the rail, eyes on me, I told the lad. He nodded, then remembered I couldn't see nods and squeezed my sleeve twice. Our code for I'm here. Codes keep people from becoming scenery. Top landing. Heat like a hand on the back of your neck. Doors stripped of paint by years of breath now blistered with a new, cruel varnish. I found the flat by the cough. There's a sound lungs make when they've agreed to be brave, but not useful. Thin, apologetic, still trying good manners. We shouldered through. The first room had already made its decision. Curtains on their knees, a chair burning politely, as if waiting its turn. In the bedroom, a woman lay half-sat with a blanket over a man whose leg made a wrong argument with the floor. "Hello, love," I said to her, because endearments are splints. "We're going to be boring and sensible." To him, "You'll hate me for 10 seconds. The lad cut the blanket. I checked pulses, slid a triangular bandage under his knee, cinched a tourniquet above the fracture just enough to argue pain into compliance. "Count with me," I told him, in 2s. Breathing in 2s steals room from panic. 2 beats in, pause, 2 out. The woman tried to stand, failed to, and I put the lad's hand in hers. "You're his heir," I said. She became a bellows by will alone. Floor groaned. That warden's whistle pecked again, closer, collapse risk now a promise. I looked at the ceiling and at the door in the same glance. "Sheet under, roll on 3, I said. 3 is kind to saints and stretchers. We backed him down the stairs in a dance that pretends it isn't a dance. My heel, his breath, the lad's knee, each landing a small treaty. At the turn, a joist complained like an old aunt. We ignored her nicely and shortened the carry. On the ground floor, the world tried a trick. A wind found the hall, smoke sprinted, and the fire chose a new room to love. I slammed the door with the last of its honesty and shoved the stretcher through the gap our torch made in the night. Outside, London had decided to sound like itself again. Pumps clattering, wardens shouting street names as if taking attendance, the ambulance coughing impatience. We slid the man in, strapped him, checked his pupils, equal enough to believe in. Then turned to the woman who had followed barefoot, blood finding its way between the flagstones. "Shoes," I said absurdly, because absurd saves people as often as morphine. The lad took off his own and pressed them into her hands like a prayer you can walk in. 2 minutes, the driver called, before the lads drop another row. I looked up at the roofline, sparks throwing confetti for ghosts, tracer like spite drawing lines nobody wanted to read. "Right," I said to the street. "Be good." We pushed for the next door because that is the only way the night becomes morning. At number 22, the bell had fused in a rictus of surprise. We hammered with a bucket. A child answered with a cough. Behind her, the hallway was all edges. "Fire escape?" I asked. She shook her head in the rhythm of someone who has used all her words on fear. I scooped her, arm under knees, chin to my shoulder, felt the tiny drum of ribs against cloth, and ran the way women run when the future is a physical object to be carried. At the curb, the man in the ambulance grabbed my sleeve. "Backboard's free in 20, he said. I set the child on it like a crown and looked back at the houses we weren't finished with. The lad was already at number 24, torch slit like a new moon. "Good boy," I said, which is what you say to London some nights. Then the sky took a breath, the street leaned, and the siren wound itself down into that strange, spent quiet that isn't peace, just the city catching up with its own courage. We knocked again. Triage on a London pavement is arithmetic done with breath and light and the weight your hands remember. We worked by the gutter because gutters are honest. Water goes where truth would have given a chance. I chalked the curb with the alphabet of need. Our 4 ride now, W for wait with, B for blanket and watch, and across through a circle when mercy had to be the only clever thing left. Paper tags ran out on the first siren of the week. Chalk and voice never do. You learn to read a body in the first 4 seconds. Color talks, a gray that wants to be green, a red that cannot be ignored, a blue you argue with until it listens. I knelt at a man blinking slow and useless. "I'm nurse," I said, because that word outranks panic. Fingers to carotid, present but lazy. Hand under shoulder, sticky warmth that means I sit him forward or I drown him in his own blood. "Spit, love," I ordered, and he tried obedience the way Englishmen do, with manners. Blood found the road and left his lungs to better work. I tucked a dressing in place and handed his hand to a stranger. "You are his weather," I told the stranger. "Keep him in fair." Next, a woman with glass for freckles and a silence I didn't trust. Silence is a thief on nights like this. I took her wrist, thread pulse, fretful but proud, and slipped my fingers under the edge of her coat. Right lower quadrant rigid, breath shallow, pupils too interested in the world. "Internal," I said to the ledger the city keeps in my head, and snapped for the lad. Tag read, "Send her." We lacked the good tags with colors, so I tore a strip from my apron, folded it twice, and tied it where a driver would see it even if rain got ambitious. On my left, a warden's lamp signaled 3 short, roof loose over the shop front. I moved my 3W patient's 2 bodies length down the curb, the way you move chess and pretend at luck. "You with me," I told a boy drowning in bravery. "Hand here, pressure like you argue with a stubborn ant." He pressed, I praised, and in that brief exchange he became my junior and stayed that way for a whole hour. Morphine was a rumor more than a vial this week. I carried 6 ampoules and a conscience. You spend 1 and inherit a sermon. The man with the belly wound got a half, enough to turn cliff into hill, not enough to make his breathing forget the road. "Look at my finger," I said, and moved it left and right to prove both eyes still belong to the same head. Pupils held like decent men at funerals. Good. I pinned his name to his coat with a safety, wrote LLQ, watch in pencil on the lapel where rain would blur the flourish but not the warning. The new lad hovered over a boy with a scalp cut and the indignation that keeps boys alive. Foam at the lip, not the bad kind. Thank God, just fear and dust. I cleaned with boiled water from a kettle someone's aunt had pressed into my hands. London is an ocean of ants when the sirens stop arguing. Head wounds look braver than they are, I told the lad, and bleed like they're performing for a crowd. Pressure, band, reassurance, the Holy Trinity. I put the boy's cap back on crooked so he would have something small to correct with his hands. Idle hands take up panic. Busy ones carry you to dawn. A man in shirt sleeves staggered up, carrying, not a child, not exactly. A man small from the waist down, polio maybe, now smoky and blinking. "He's mine," the shirt sleeves said, belligerent with love. I set them both on an upturned crate and found the small man's breath like a sparrow. No burns, praise be, just smoke and a heart offended by excitement. "Fee," I said, and from nowhere tea appeared, black as sin, sweet as permission. London could fuel a war on tea and defiance alone. The first sip wrote a better story on his face. The second convinced his hands to stop rehearsing an argument with God. Sirens scaled down into that smaller sound the city makes when it decides to live. Pumps, shovels, men reporting to other men who used to be clerks and now are cartographers of fire. I took a tally the way mothers take attendance. Who is mine? Who wants to be? Who must be pushed towards someone else's mercy? Or to the ambulance queue, belly woman, chest lad, old gent with the blue knit whose pulse kept practicing its disappearances. W to the curb's dry patch, scalp boy, polio man, shirt sleeves, whose hands needed a job more than a physician. Hold this dressing like a story you don't want dropped, I told him, and he gripped it with all the chapters. Behind us, the shopfront coughed glass into the street. We flinched and then reassembled our faces. The warden whistled one short, one long, beam shift, roof sulk, and I moved my chalk marks another yard, erasing with my boot to keep history from tattling. The lad glanced at the morphine case again, craving easy miracles. Breath before bliss, I reminded him. Air, bleeding, broken, our ABCs, not the alphabet of cowards. He nodded and did the next decent thing, folded his coat into a pillow for a stranger. Good lad. London trains that kind of etiquette into you in peacetime, so you can weaponize it now. A woman in a hat that had seen better summers tried to give me a biscuit tin of jewels. For hospital, she said, shaking. I took her wrist instead and counted backward with her until breath remembered arithmetic. Keep the tin, I said gently. Hospitals accept courage and clean handkerchiefs. You'll give both before dawn. She laughed the laugh that always sounds like crying when cities burn, and put the tin back in her bag as if it were a child who had been forgiven. The driver waved from the end of the queue. 2 spots. I sent my belly patient and the old gent blue knit, wrote priority in the kind of letters that cut through a harried porter's guilt, and tapped the ambulance's flank twice like a horse I grew up with. It pulled away into the alley of sparks where heroes are mostly clutch plates and timing chains. The street leaned toward quiet for half a minute. We spent it on water, on blankets, on a joke about the king that would be treason if God didn't have a sense of humor. Next light change, I told the lad. We sweep the doorways for sleepers and the proud. The proud are the ones who say I'm fine while their skin reads the wrong book. We hunt them like lost receipts. We found a proud one in the stoop of number 14, a woman holding her handbag like a rank. Face soot clean where tears had run, hands clean where gloves had been. All right, dear, I asked, the way you ask furniture if it plans to hold. Perfectly, she lied, and tried to stand into a world that tilted. I took her hands. They were cold like kitchens at 4 a.m. capillary refill, a trick I learned from a surgeon with pockets full of patience. Came back like an apology. Shock wears good lipstick. Sit, I said, sitting first, and London obeyed its old manners. Her husband's name was on the tip of her tongue and wouldn't come. Names hide in smoke. I pressed a sweet into her cheek, the rationed kind, hoarded by saints and handed across to sinners like me. And the sugar fetched her from wherever wives go when the floor disappears. He's at the shelter, she remembered, counting blankets. Good. Counting saves more lives than bandages, most nights. The new lad called me to a doorway where a man had folded himself in the neatest possible shape and decided to be furniture. His color had the argument I dread, that gray that leans for blue as if reaching for a coat. Pulse, there then shy. Breath, high and useless. I pinched fingers, earned no complaint. Right then, I said, and moved him from neat to awkward, shoulders open, chin high, tongue tamed with a handkerchief twist. I slid my last airway tube, rubber, resentful, past his teeth like a promise I planned to keep, and his chest remembered it had been a bellows once. Color stumbled back toward pink. We propped him with the door we had just removed from its hinges. Doors will do more good lying down than standing up on nights like this. Across the way, a constable who had once been a tailor held a man's femoral with the expertise of someone who knows thread. Pressure here, he said without looking up. I knelt, took the corner, and felt the spurting turn to stubborn. You're hired, I told him. He smiled the small smile married men make when praised by women who scare them. We dressed it quick, field tourniquet improvised from a length of blackout curtain, because war gets to borrow from every room, and wrote the time on his wrist in pencil so no one would forget when we had been cruel on purpose. A stirrup pump rattled arrogant nearby. The wardens had knocked 3 incendiaries into sulks and were teaching a 4th humility. Their buckets passed from hand to hand with the grace of music. Water, someone shouted. Thee, someone else corrected, because humor lifts more than stretchers. The church at the corner rang one apologetic note. The bell rope must have slipped in a draft. I took it as permission. We swept the street's edges again, because the proud breed in shadows. One more. A boy in uniform trousers held up by a belt not his. Boots 2 sizes wrong. Jaw set for a photo he would never take. Smoke wheezed in him like old man's jokes. Not burned. Thanks saints. Just lungs insulted by a city that had asked too much of both of them. I put the Steph to his back and heard rails singing in a tunnel. Tight, squealing, not stopping when they should. In through your nose, out as if you're cooling soup, I told him. He laughed, tried it, found a rhythm he didn't hate. I wrote observe, cough on his cuff in chalk, so anyone who found him later would know our plan. By the curb the cue returned as an animal we knew how to feed. 2 more ambulances, brass radiators like proper chests. I loaded our patients as if laying bricks, square, certain, no gaps for guilt to grow. The W1s I gave to blankets and neighbors, and the portable shrine of a teapot that had learned to officiate. The lad counted our morphine. 2 left, and I shook my head. Save them for the ones who already look at somewhere else, I said softly. He slipped the case back like a boy hiding love letters. A hush fell, the dangerous kind. Even the fires seemed to kneel to listen. In that hush we heard the far rip of a blast that had chosen another parish, and the nearer tick-tick of magnesium determining our street was tiresome but not finished. All right, I told the pavement my chalk, the lad, London myself. We've made a beginning. Now we make it again. The ambulance clanged its door. The driver swore at a gear that preferred peacetime, and I felt the city put its hand on our backs and push. Triage is choosing who the morning gets to keep. Tonight, the morning would need extra chairs. Our Austin hated second gear like a cat hates baths, but she loved London enough to forgive the rest. We kept her idling low, chuff, chuff, patient, as if the engine understood triage and waited its turn. The blackout mask on the headlamps sliced light into obedience. 2 thin commas on the road, not enough for a poet, just enough for a driver with a map of rubble memorized. I rode left seat with the stretcher straps looped around my wrist the way sailors loop line when they trust weather but not luck. Mind the mains, the driver muttered, as if the burst water had feelings. Water mains burst differently from gas. Water shouts, gas whispers, and then elects a prophet. We veered where the street turned to river, crossed a hose the width of a man's leg, and saluted the pump crew who were arguing with a shop full of hats. Of course hats burn, the driver said, because London adores a moral. The warden on the corner flashed his hooded lamp twice, clear for now, and we took the turn that used to be a bakery and now was a geography lesson in flour, ash, and melted sugar. The new lad clung to the pole at the rear like a sailor who hadn't earned his sea legs. She'll stall, he predicted, a brave thing to say out loud when fate has ears. The driver double-declutched, coaxed second like a nurse talking a pulse into good manners, and the engine found its song. A near one cracked somewhere to our east. Thump, breath, the long complaint of brick learning to be dust. The ambulance flinched in her springs, and then remembered she was older than most of the pilots and had nothing to prove. We threaded between 2 lorries that had discovered each other's bumpers in the dark and were now married by law. The driver lifted a hand at the men swearing about it, and they swore back in the friendly way people swear when everyone has already survived something worse tonight. Hospital run after this load, he said, unless the corner falls down first. The corner considered it, chewed on a gout of flame, and decided to hold for one more verse. We took the hill in first because pride kills engines and men both. Halfway up, a UXB signboard loomed, a door painted yellow with a hand pointing left, the kind of joke London paints when it wants you to lift. Divert. The driver grunted, and I leaned out to mind the near side wing where masonry had invented a new curb. Sparks kissed the running board. I told the ambulance she was beautiful, and she believed me. Flattery keeps machines as honest as oil. At the crest, the wind changed its mind and drove a sheet of smoke across the bonnet. I cracked my window, 1 finger's worth, so the smell could tell me its story. Not gas, no fish in the nose, good. Not rubber, no theater, better. Coal and timber, a library's afterthought, and the sweet lie of burning sugar from the hat shop's neighbor. Mask him. I called back, and the lad fitted the patient's mask over the burned gauze we'd laid to keep air respectful. The man's chest rose like a reluctant tide, then steadied. The bottle hissed it stalwart him. We slid past a tram frozen on its rails, roof net catching stars that were not stars. A conductor stood sentinel with his ticket punch like a relic. All off. I asked through the slit. He nodded, heroic and superfluous, which is a kind of holiness. I tossed him a roll of bandage, and he caught it like a cricket ball he'd been waiting his whole life to deserve. "Bless you, miss," he said, and I felt the city stamp a visa in my pocket. A siren up the slope coughed and died. Batteries tire before people do. Wardens on the corners swapped whistles for their own voices. "Mind the crater. Gas main's out. Roof comes down if you blink at it." Their speech made a map faster than any pencil. We eased into the crater's lip where cobbles had learned to be beach, and the driver let the back axle think about swimming without committing. "Careful," I said to the night, and it was. Behind me, the lad counted breaths in the rhythm I'd given him. 2 in, hold, 2 out. He tapped the stretcher rail on every fifth, our code for still with us. I reached back and found the patient's wrist. The pulse sat there like a cat who had agreed not to leave, but might yet. "Stay," I told it, and it kneaded my fingers with a small, obedient thrum. We turned toward the river, where the air is damp even when the tide is mean. Bridges throw shadows even in blackout. You feel them more than see them, a coolness across the cheek, a hush under the tires. A home guard post waved us through with a bayonet that looked ashamed of being ornamental. Hospital reports chokers full. The sergeant warned. Try Street Bart's or the school hall. Bart's was already a geography of stretchers. The school hall was nearer and hungrier. We chose hunger. Hunger always makes space. Outside the hall, Yarpy flags, 2 strips on a broom, signaled receiving and morphine scarce. I jumped down into a puddle that had made a religion of my socks and signaled our load. Right hand high, airway. Left hand low, fracture. Then a circle, bleed controlled. The wardens became an oiled, filthy ballet. Backboard, hands, lift, swing, and our man vanished into the light that schoolrooms keep for spelling and mercy. The lad paused on the step, waiting for me to tell him he'd been a good boy. I don't pay with words when time wants change. "Bundle," I said instead. "Blankets, too. Bottles, full. And ask for tea like you outrank God." He did, and won. He came back with a kettle that had seen empires and 2 enamel mugs that had seen worse and kept their dignity. We drank standing, steam baptizing our faces. Somewhere nearby, a piano decided to be useful and hammered out a waltz with 3 fingers. Somebody in pain laughed in the right places. London, ridiculous and correct, applauded the wrong bar. We loaded again because the street had not run out of people who needed to be somewhere else. One more sweep. The driver said, which in Blitz arithmetic means until the petrol or our luck loses interest. I scribbled our route in grease pencil on the dash. Bart's crossed, Hall ticked, St. Jude's maybe, and reached back for the spare lantern that behaves when torches sulk. Battery gave me half a smile. Good enough. Half of everything is London's favorite fraction. We crept along the river wall where fire washed itself in black water. The farthing lane shelters spilled figures like ink. Mothers with parcels making their small nations portable. Boys holding the hands of men who would pretend it was the other way round. A warden flagged us with a triangle of sacking, breather gone wrong, and we nosed in under the arch where brick learns to sweat. The man on the bench had the color of a note folded too long. His chest's small quarrel with physics had become a divorce. I knelt, fitted the valve, thumbed the bottle, and let oxygen behave like permission. In through the nose, love, smell Sunday roast. I lied, and he chuckled at the memory long enough for his lungs to remember being instruments. A boy asked if he could help. Boys always ask at the very best and worst times. I gave him the job that keeps boys from becoming ghosts. Count my seconds out loud, steady as a metronome. He did, solemn with purpose, and the man's chest kept time to a child's voice while the world misbehaved outside. Good lad, I said, paying him the only currency that spends in the dark, and sent him to fetch someone else's courage. Back on the road, the ambulance found her stride. Noses of flames reflected in our slit lamps like badgers deciding whether to cross. We hit the stretch where the cobbles give up and macadam panics. The rear skip danced, and the lad yelped. Feet wide, I coached. Knees soft. Think sailor, not soldier. He learned in one curve what peace takes a year to teach. On the corner by the fishmongers, an incendiary fizzed like gossip. The warden smothered it with a scoop of sand and the insolence of gods. We clapped, 2 beats with gloves, and the warden gave us a bow he didn't have time for. The engine coughed. Once, twice. The way old men cough when they want to be asked about their medals. The driver stroked the wheel. "Don't you dare," he told her, and she didn't. We rolled into a street that had chosen to be silent so cats could understand it. In that quiet, I heard the small sound I hate. A baby trying to be braver than its lungs. Left-hand muse, 3rd door. The mother stood in the stairwell with her courage already spent, offering me the bundle like a treaty. Steam burns along the wrist, no blister yet. Smoke in the voice, some noises too fast. I cooled tiny skin with the water we could spare and wrapped the rest in the cleanest corner of my soul. Hospital. I told the driver, no argument in it. He nodded, found a path that wasn't there, and made one. We gave the hall our 2nd load and stole 2 more blankets because theft is logistics with better manners. The matron signed my nothing with a pencil worn to a belief. "You can't keep this up," she said. "No," I agreed, "and we will." Outside, the blackout learned to be dawn for a second, just a thinning, a doubt, and then remembered itself. We turned the Austin's nose toward the quarter still shouting and the quarter that had gone hoarse. On the dash, my grease pencil map had wept into a smudge. I rewrote it without looking. The driver laughed. "You women and your magic." "It's not magic," I said, tightening a strap I'd already tightened. "It's remembering, out loud, with wheels." Behind us, the piano in the hall stumbled into Roll Out the Barrel, and somebody who had every right not to join in. The ambulance took the next corner like a promise kept. Somewhere ahead, a whistle pecked 3 notes, collapse risk, and we answered with our own song. Clutch, gear, breath. The ARP post lived in a cellar that had once been ambitious about pickles. Now it held maps that sweated at the corners and a kettle drum that pretended to be a dustbin lid. We called each other by streets rather than names. Bethnal, Clerkenwell, Spittle, as if postcodes were saints and we their shabby acolytes. A chalkboard kept the night's grammar. White X for craters, yellow for live mains, red for roofs that had learned cruelty. In the corner, a coil of hose dreamed of being a python. Beside it, a row of stirrup pumps leaned like tired soldiers waiting for a better war. Wardens wear helmets like punctuation. Full stop for the stubborn, comma for the ones who listen. Ours listened. Mrs. Doyle ran the post the way matrons run worlds, with tea, scorn, and a ledger that forgave nothing except bravery. She read the sky the way farmers do, but for different harvests. Cluster east, fire to follow. Keep your buckets honest, she said, and we obeyed without wasting her time with agreement. On the trestle table, whistles, torches with polite slits, spare masks, dry socks in a tin like treasure, sugar ration locked under the Bible as if God might steal it. The drill is a lullaby you learn with your bones. Whistle too short for bomb in, one long for roof sulk. Trilled nonsense, forget your silly head down now. Buckets by doors, lids beside stoves, sand where prudence collects dust. 2 to a pump. One works the handle. The other becomes clever about aiming a tantrum of water at a magnesium brat. The trick is to smother the temper, not feed it story. When the incendiaries fall thick, we step stamp with the briskness of housemaids. When they scatter, we become gardeners with an ugly weed. Tee up, called Mrs. Doyle, which outranks half the army's bugle calls. Mugs clinked, enamel confessing old sins. The new lad blew on us like a boy. The steam gave him back a face that wasn't only ash and astonishment. We paired him with Mr. Penn, cobbler by day, philosopher by necessity, who could read rafters by sound. Floors talk from the kneecaps, roofs from the teeth. Penn instructed, tapping the lad's helmet. If the house laughs at you, go round the back. We moved as a grammar across our little parish. Verb, pump, noun, bucket, adverb, quickly, conjunction, together. Incendiaries seeded the rooftops like ugly stars. We answered with ladders and insolence. Mr. Penn took the roof of the haberdashers with the confidence of a man who has spent a life arguing with stubborn leather. He sounded the tiles with his heel. Tap, tap, liar. And found the spot where a magnesium beast had bitten through and was eating laugh. Gently now, he said, as if courting, and we fed it sand until it sulped into slag. On the corner, Two wardens turn to Stirrup pump the way rowers row when they have no intention of drowning. Handle up, handle down, host spitting righteousness. The pump wants rhythm, not enthusiasm. London taught us both. The new lad learned the step stamp. Heel on the beast's back, shovel to starve it. Tip with the grace of a barman who knows when not to splash. Sparks tried for our faces and met visors that have seen worse suns. Beneath us the street rehearsed its household tragedies. A woman wrung out a blanket over a doorway as if laundering a bad dream. A man swore at a shutter that refused to be helpful. Someone sang in the key of stubborn. The fire brigade thundered through like cavalry, brass helmets daring fate to improve their shine. We make way for the brigade the way people make way for saints on feast days, pious and nosy. They took the warehouse where hats had become theology. We kept the smaller blasphemies. Signal, Mrs. Doyle called from below, voice clean as a bell. We checked the lamplight code, 1 hooded flash for clear, 2 for watch roof, 3 for come down now unless you prefer memorials. 2 it was. We crawled to the gutter as the roof shrugged a little and then remembered its manners. The new lad laughed his fear into a joke. We let him keep the joke like a found coin. At the post, a message runner from the next parish arrived with a face like news. Water out on Hoxton Street. She panted, hair pinned with nails that had once been useful elsewhere. Sand only. Sand means patience. Mrs. Doyle handed her a fruit drop from the tin no one admits exists, wrote Hoxton in block letters a child could read at dawn, and sent us with sacks that used to dream of potatoes. We are mules when the city asks for mules. Hoxton Street had chosen to glow like a sermon. No mains. Hose lay slack as dead snakes. Sand crews worked with the ferocity of quiet people who have decided not to be moved. We joined them without ceremony. The trick with an incendiary is to starve it like a rumor, feed it attention, and it multiplies. We scooped and smothered, lids clanging down on bins like gongs calling the faithful. At number 7, a shower of sparks made a crown for a girl who refused to duck. Hairpin spit back fire quite prettily. I clapped a tin hat onto her and told her she was promoted to sensible. She saluted with a face that will break hearts after the war and went back to the bucket line with the dignity of a queen demoted to porter. Mr. Penn coached the new lad through his first lonely smother. No partner, just a shovel and nerve, while I kept watch for the sly, the slinking ropes of flame that seek door lintels and curtains like cats. A whistle trilled, the now, you fool note, and we all crouched by instinct. A wall side 2 houses down and settled forward by the width of a prayer. Dust took the street and tested our lungs. Our masks wrote their worth across our stubborn survival. In the gray, I felt a hand find my sleeve, 2 squeezes. I'm here. The lad's code learned a new meaning then. Not just location, but I can keep doing this. Good. I set into the cloth, which is all praise needs on nights like these. When the dust remembered to fall, the street belonged to us again, blackened, simplified, honest. A kettle appeared from nowhere with the inevitability of fate. We filled mugs that had never seen china and called it supper. Someone passed a biscuit that might once have been cheerful. We ate like conspirators and laughed like people who intend to do so again. The fire brigade's pump found water 2 corners over and sent it our way with the generosity of a river meeting its thirsty children. Hoses fattened, nozzles hissed, and the larger fire learned humility from pressure and professionals. We shouldered our sacks back to the post, helmets dented, trousers baptized in all the sacraments a city can spill. On the chalkboard, Mrs. Doyle drew a line through Hoxton as if striking out a bad thought. You'll do, she told us. Next is the only word the night respects. In the doorway, the new lad hesitated, eyes dragged down the street we had just convinced to live. How long till all this stops? He asked, small with honesty. Mr. Penn adjusted his helmet to a more useful angle. Until we're better at it than they are, he said, and handed him a bucket. Basements teach humility by inches. You go down 1 step, then another, and the air thickens into a soup of breath and candle and the long patience of coal. Tonight, the parish shelter under St. Bride's had become a geography of knees and suitcases. Chalk marks on the wall told yesterday's lesson, capacity 180. London does not respect arithmetic when fear is in the queue. We found 200 and something, plus a terrier who had learned to pray. ARP. I called, keeping the voice low so panic wouldn't remember its lines. Anyone faint? Anyone blue? Anyone with pain here? I touched my own sternum. Bodies understand pantomime. Hands rose like weeds. We triaged by benches. Left for coffers, right for bleeders, near the stairs for the ones we might have to carry back up in a hurry. A deacon shuffled over with a tray of enamel cups that had known war before this one. "Fee," he said, "the sacrament London trusts most." I blessed him with a grin and a request for boiling water. He blessed me back with a kettle and a look that had decided not to cry yet. The vicar had moved the font to make room for stretchers. He hovered, guilty about pews that had become planks for splints. "She'll forgive us," I told him, nodding at the nave. "Church is like being useful." He smiled the small smile of a man who has argued with God all his life and expects to lose gracefully. In the side aisle, a stained glass saint took shrapnel like a gentleman, one neat star in the blue. The shard lay glittering on the flagstones, new enough to gather, holy enough to leave. We stepped around it as if it had feelings. Near the stairwell, a mother tried to breathe for two, belly heavy with a future that refused to keep Blackout. "How far along?" I asked, hand already on the pulse that telegraphs such things. 7 months, she said, brave with the lie women tell when they want to spare you trouble. The midwife arrived like punctuation, bag, scarf, verdict. 8 in a generous week, she corrected, and set about rearranging blankets and rules. We are a religion of women in basements on nights like these. One stirs tea, one counts breaths, one negotiates with the next generation. The air down there learned to stack itself. Warm breath near the ceiling, damp courage at knee height, children's questions rolling about like marbles. A harmonica coughed into being and played something that wanted to be cheerful. A grandmother hushed it with a look that remembered Zeppelins. I worked the coffers line first. Smoke sits in lungs like a bad tenant. You evict with posture, patience, and lies about Sunday roast. In through the nose. I coached, out as if you're cooling soup. The soup joke earns a smile in every parish. Tonight it earned 3. A boy of 12 insisted on carrying water, eyes big with the idea that his hands could be important. I gave him the job with dignity attached. Escort the tea, count cups, fetch refills like a prince. Important boys do not wander. He became a river between benches, and panic ebbed behind him by an inch each lap. Beside the pillar, a clerk with spectacles mended by tape had turned into my registrar. "Names?" I asked, "or the names you want on paper?" And he wrote what people offered, sometimes legal, sometimes kind, sometimes mum. We pinned notes to coats with safety pins that outnumbered miracles. The ground grumbled. Far off, not our turn. A shiver ran through the benches the way wind runs through wheat. I walked the aisle with a smile too wide and a step too steady, performing calm until it stopped being theater. At the back, a young man in RAF blue held himself rigid with shame, grounded by orders, trapped by luck. "You breathe for someone else tonight," I told him, and sat him beside an old man whose stories needed an audience. They both survived the hour. I call that medicine. We had one bad one. A gentleman whose suit had learned to be dust at the seams, who kept asking me to take him upstairs because he had promised a wife to meet her by the railings if the house fell. Promises are stubborn creatures. I pressed his hand to his own chest and counted with him until his heart agreed to stay inside its proper work. "We'll take you," I said, truth deferred but not denied. When the fire remembers its manners. The vicar appeared with a psalm disguised as conversation, and the gentleman let the rhythm take him by the sleeve. We are magicians with paper tricks. The clergy have better patter. A near one changed the church's mind. The nave exhaled dust and candle smoke. The lamp over the aisle did its best impression of a star being born and then reconsidered. From the stairwell, a warden's whistle pecked twice. Watch the roof. Then once long, stay low. We moved the bleeders closer to the font and the coffers toward the door, in case the door forgot to be kind. The terrier barked at theology and was forgiven. Then the thing I'd been dreading but rehearsing. The all clear in one direction, the stubborn continuation of the raid in another. People stand when they hear their freedom announced. People must not stand if their street is still negotiating with gravity. I climbed the steps halfway and turned to face the congregation we had invented. 2 parishes over. I called, not ours yet. "Sit, please." Please is a lever. London obeys it better than order. The harmonica tried cheer again. This time the grandmother allowed it. The midwife raised a hand from her corner. "False labor," she mouthed, "but keep her laughing." I recruited the terrier, who performed excellently at being ridiculous. The mother's breathing settled into something that promised to keep its end of the bargain until morning. We shared out barley sugars like victory medals and practiced gulping air through damp scars for when the stairs invited us to leave. When the true all-clear finally wrote itself across the ceiling, sirens unwinding, engines moving toward tired, and the vicar looked at me for permission to ring the bell, I shook my head. "Not yet," I said. "It will sound like gloating to someone." He nodded as if I had quoted scripture. We released the people in rows, as if for communion. Coffers first, bleeders with escorts, children shepherded between aunties who had gone to church for music and found logistics instead. Up in the street, dawn had chosen to be gray rather than merciful. Smoke made its own weather. The church stood in it like an old woman in coat and hat who refuses to find fault. On the steps, the gentleman with the promise to his wife found the railings intact, and a city willing to pretend it had kept both their bargains. He took my hand and pressed into it the only currency that buys anything on a morning like this. His thank you said like a confession. I walked back into the nave to fetch my bag and looked up at the stained glass. The saint's wound let one thin blade of day onto the aisle, a ridiculous, perfect stripe of clean. We placed a bench under it so the next waiting would have a better view. Churches don't fall if you give them useful jobs. Neither do women. There's a silence that only London learns. The hush after the big ones finish their sermon and before the little white devils clear their throats. You can hear moths then. You can hear your own tendons. And if you've done 3 raids already this week, you can hear the incendiaries cueing their manners. A faint sewing machine chatter high up, a falling that isn't quite falling, like metal remembering how to be rain. We used the pause the way tailors use chalk. I repacked the bag with what the next hour would want. Sand scoops, 2 extra stirrup pump leathers, wool socks, dry feet save tempers, safety pins, 3 field dressings, 2 triangulars, 1 last ampoule hiding under the elastic like a guilty thought. The new lad tested his whistle and winced at its impertinence. "Save it for roofs," I said. "People hear it as panic. Houses hear it as grammar." Then the chatter turned to punctuation. Plink, plink, an impatient tinkle on slates, and the white glare began to write itself across the eaves. Incendiaries don't explode so much as decide the world is flammable. They make a light fit for angels and then behave like brats. We split. Driver to fetch buckets from number 12's yard. She has the good ash. Lad to pin and the roof team. Me to the gentles where the tin roofs take fire like they've been waiting all their lives to be taken seriously. The first beast lay fizzing on a corrugated lean-to, chewing a neat hole like a mouse with opinions. I threw sand not on it, but into its breath, a mean, careful pour that taught it boredom. The second had fallen through a skylight into a milliner's back room, of course hats again, and was licking tissue paper with cruel affection. I flattened it with a bin lid and a prayer, the kind with verbs and no theology. 2 more coded themselves down the alley in dots of light. Morse for hurry, hurry, hurry. We answered with our bucket alphabet and the old city trick of not hurrying where running breaks ankles. Up on the haberdashers, Penn had the lad on a leash of instructions. "Don't chase," he barked over the roof's sulk. "They want to run. Step, stamp, smother. Listen with your boots. Roofs tell you more with heat than with noise." I tested slates with the back of my hand through wet rag, felt the simmer where timber hadn't decided yet. "Here," I called, and Penn drove his scoop exactly there. The way cobblers drive awls into leather when they mean to save a shoe. A string of pearls hissed along the gutter, magnesium runoff meeting rainwater, and spat as if offended to be thwarted. The lad flinched, then remembered dignity, then remembered instruction. Heel down, shovel side on, lid ready. He looked ridiculous and correct, which is my favorite combination in men during wars. An incendiary in a dormer corner flared like a temper, found our sand, and slumped into something you could pick up with tongs and throw into the street to sulk in public. Far off, another battery started up, German or ours, hard to tell. Everyone plays drums in this orchestra, and the neighborhood shadows shifted. That's the danger. Glare makes edges lie. I crawled the ridge and tapped the slates in sets of 3, the way we count the living, then called down for the pump. The stirrup piston stuck on the upstroke, dry leather, So I spat on it with great ceremony and gave it a scolding best reserved for nephews. It forgave me. Water arced low and heavy. We sheeted heat off a skylight and nudged the temperature of a bad idea down toward sulk. In the alley below, two incendiaries had learned partnership, one gnawing the lintel, the other cording the curtains. I took the lintel brat. Mrs. Doyle herself took the curtain flirt with the kind of contempt only senior women can deploy without using adjectives. Not tonight, she told it, and it believed her. We capped both with lids and left note chalk for the brigade. Checked joist / safe enough. There's no perfect in a night like this. There's enough, written small and true. Then the magnesium, try cleverness. One fell through a skylight into a staircase void, down where buckets don't reach and water would only make steam's nasty cousin. We went to Plan Andy, doors off hinges, laid as shields, two wardens belly crawl with lids, one above, one below, me at the landing with the pump playing pianist, soft and steady. Smoke argued in a dozen dialects. We answered with damped sacking and the slow arithmetic of denial. The beast fought, sputtered, flashed its saintly glare, and went to slag with a sigh. I blessed it with a boot toe on general principle. Across the street, a plume had found the old varnish shop, savage, quick. Brigade took it with hose and profanity. We supported with the small, stubborn courage that keeps peripheries from joining revolutions. The new lad made his first call without looking for permission, a too-short whistle for roof sulk, and Penn saluted him with a grin that would have cost money in daylight. "You're hired," he said, and the city marked the boy down as useful. The pause ended the way all pauses end. A single distant thump like a drum major clearing his throat, then the long roll of bombers recommitting to their opinions. The incendiaries went quiet, as if ashamed to have shown off. We swept the roofs for the last sullen glow, chalked check AM/safe for now, where conscience insisted, and clambered down into a street that smelled of wet ash and lessons. At the post, Mrs. Doyle dipped a clean rag in hot water and wiped a soot mustache off my face with the intimacy only women of a certain age may assume. "You've got London on you," she said. "Leave a bit. It becomes you." Tea arrived. It always does. We stood under the cellar arch, mugs against lips, and listened for the sky's next sentence. The big ones were turning pages again. Back to casualties, I told the lad. Bag refilled, socks swapped, whistle checked. He nodded, taller by a truth he hadn't had to learn the hard way. Fires shout, but work gets done in the pauses. We stepped out, and the night, ridiculous and obedient, made a path through its own mess for us to follow. Fire doesn't travel in straight lines, it gossips. It takes the shortest path that is also the cruelest. Up stairwells that breathe like flutes, along picture rails that were polished every Sunday, through floor voids carpenters left as polite secrets a century ago. You can hear it choosing. Tonight it chose the back-to-backs off Brushfield, where alleyways knit into a cat's cradle and roofs shake hands behind people's backs. We entered through a yard that had once fancied itself a garden. One geranium pot, now a kiln, a wash line strung with 3 pegs, now a fuse. I cut the line with my shears because laundry kills heroes. The warden's lamp threw a narrow mercy across a coal bunker that had decided to impersonate a barricade. "Left-hand house first," I said. "Right-hand one's bragging. Braggers hold a minute longer." Mr. Penn went roof forward with 2. I went in low with the lad, and the driver stood sentry at the lane mouth to turn away helpful idiots, which London breeds like pigeons. Inside, the corridor was a thesis on heat. Wallpaper lifted itself delicately from lath as if changing its mind about marriage. Floorboards pinged nails like headaches learning Morse. Kitchen first, always, where the oil lives, where fat remembers being animal. I dragged the paraffin can from under the sink and shoved it into the yard where it could regret its life choices in the rain. The lad stomped the heart out of a hearth rug that had fallen in love with the coal, then looked up at the ceiling as if ceilings were trustworthy. "Not the ceiling," I snapped. "Listen to the corners. Corners carry rumors faster than rooms do." In the scullery, a door stuck halfway, as if ashamed. I shouldered it open and found the old woman everyone told me had gone to her sister's. She had, briefly, and then come back for the clock her husband had wound through 2 wars. "My dear," I said, with more authority than God, "let me be the one who disappoints your husband. I put the clock in her hands and the woman in the lad's, and we marched her through a world that had decided to be charcoal. At the threshold, she turned to lock the door. I took her hand and set it on my sleeve instead. Locking doors is a peacetime hobby. Back in, right-hand house now. The bragger had begun to sulk. Flames had eaten the stair carpet letter by letter, leaving the alphabet of scorch. Above, a room breathed harsh. Below, the cellar exhaled cold like a witness who knows too much. Up, I decided, because stairs tell you their load if you listen through your shins. Second, tread soft. Fifth, resentful. We took them sideways and low, the way cats scandalize furniture. Bedroom 1, a mattress smoking like a lecture. I rolled it with the lad into the hearth, lid smothered, and left it there to think about its behavior. Bedroom 2, a man by the sash, convincing himself air was outside and could be imported in handfuls. Not that way, I said, and set his hands on the sill to keep them useful while I took the blanket to the door line. Would it with the last good bucket, and taught the fire boredom again. Door edges first, always, they gossip fast. Then the roof made its threat, a groan that begins in geometry and ends in biography. I checked the joists, one honest, one liar, and moved us under the honest one. On your knees, I told the room, and the room obeyed by collapsing elsewhere. A wardrobe side down in a tantrum of hangers. The man flinched. I put his own hands back on the sill. You're holding the house up. I lied, and he studied, because men are flattered by physics. We brought him onto the landing where heat had opinions. Below, the stairwell pulsed orange like a lung that had learned theater. Backstep carry, I ordered. The lad took shoulders, I took hips, and we descended counting the only numbers that matter in a hothouse. One for me, one for you, one for whoever you love. At the bend a ember leapt and wrote its name on my sleeve. I smacked it like a rude boy and promised myself the blister later. At street level the driver had assembled neighbors into a bucket line that would shame the Navy. Mrs. Doyle commanded them with a voice that parts seas. 1, 2, 1, 2. Eyes on the lip. Don't you dare spill the king's water. The old woman with the clock scolded the fire for manners. The man from the sash became useful at once, fetching lids, remembering addresses, learning that survival is a trade you can pick up on the job. The rumor leapt houses behind our backs the way schoolyard gossip does. Through the bit, everyone pretends doesn't connect. A roof valley ran into a neighbor's lean-to. A beam bridged a legal fiction. Sparks negotiated their visa with the speed of saints. Mr. Penn whistled too short from the ridge, valley alight, and I answered with 3 to say we see it, and we're angrier than you are. We cut the rumor at the narrowest part, the attic hatch. Ladders breed cowards, attics breed fools. We tried to be neither. I took the lid, the lad took the scoop, and we went up into a geography of spiders and old Christmas. The valley glowed like shame 2 rafters over. Sheet the heat, I said, and the lad, bless him, remembered. We flung the wet blanket low and pulled it up and over like tucking in a child we meant to forgive in the morning. Steam lied furiously about being smoke. We told our lungs to learn the difference. My ears filled with the sound of tiny pop-pop-pops as knots of resin lost their tempers. Behind us, the driver and 2 neighbors killed the lean-to with axes, not because we love arson, but because amputations save hearts. Timber thudded into the yard. Sparks tried to learn to fly and failed. The rumor found itself with no sentence to finish and died of boredom, our favorite cause of death in enemies. We swept for embers with gloved hands, the way you stroke a sleeping dog to be sure it is dreaming fair. Downstairs, the old woman set her clock on the mantel of a house that had not earned it yet and patted it as if to say behave. The man from the sash brought us water with the deferent seriousness of converts. The new lad sagged against the banister, then caught himself, embarrassed to be alive within sight of other people. I put a fruit drop in his palm and watched his spine remember duty. Sugar is a lever the size of London. Outside, dawn practiced at the horizon like a nervous pianist. The street had become black drawings of itself, lines simplified, the fussy bits erased. Next block, Mrs. Doyle called, and the bucket line turned as one organism, the way flocks do when they've seen the same hawk too many times. We left the houses to steam and sulk and learn what they'd been taught, and we went where rumor had already arrived. Fire runs on talk. So do we. Tonight, ours was louder. There's a moment when weight turns into a conversation. A living body answers your hands, shifts, negotiates, bargains with gravity. A dying one agrees to everything. I felt that agreement in my forearms before my eyes certified it. The man lay in the passage between shop and yard where the blast had rearranged the alphabet. A for awning in a heap, B for bricks ashamed of heights, C for cold dust that remembered being plants. He had the color I argue with most. Not blue, not gray, something between cloud and porcelain. His breath wrote in pencil. "Hello, love," I told him, because people deserve grammar at the end. "We're going to be very dull and very careful." The lad slid the oilcloth under his shoulders. I took hips. Door off its hinges became a stretcher, because heroics are for buildings. People get carpentry. We lifted on 3, the universal sacrament, and the man made a tiny sound of apology as if he'd spilled something on my good dress. "Don't fuss," I said, and that got a smile, crooked but present, the sort London uses to keep the world from hearing its bones creak. Blast had pinched the alley thin and hot. Air moves badly through grief. I led with my feet, toes finding where cobbles had learned new angles, the door crowning our arms, the lad counting softly. Step and step. Even the fire quieted to listen. Midway, the man tried to help by holding his breath. "No, you," I ordered. "Breathe for me while my hands do the vulgar bits." He obeyed because the dying are polite. We cleared the sharp turn and became briefly beautiful as a machine. 2 carriers, 1 burden, 1 door doing what doors rarely do, exit with manners. At the curb, choices lined up the way trains used to. Hospital too far, school hall full, our Austin panting with 2 already aboard who insisted on surviving. I looked at the man's mouth, remembered words living there once, wanted them to have a last, untroubled tenet, and chose the church steps, the only clean geometry available. Stone cool as truth. I set him there with his head higher than promises and wrapped the oilcloth up to his chest so the wind wouldn't practice cruelty. Pain asked to be invited. I had 1 ampoule left and a conscience. His eyes did that gaze toward a corner of the world where I have never been invited. "All right," I said, "we'll make a thief of God." Half dose into the vein that had not yet learned shyness. I watched relief climb him like sunrise. Jaw first, brow next, shoulders last. He exhaled something that might have been a man's first honest breath. "Better?" I asked. His mouth said yes without bothering his throat. The church door opened a ladle's width. The vicar's sleeve and the deacon's shadow made a small theater of mercy. I asked for water and a scrap of him. Not sung, just spoken where the words know they are safe. The vicar knelt. We are equals on stone. "Any messages?" I asked my patient, because that is the job that keeps me honest. He blinked slow, searched for a horizon he could fold into a sentence. "Tell," he started, then lost the path. I took his hand and gave him a bridge. "I will," I promised, "to whomever you meant." He accepted this edit with a tired gratitude that taught me a new kind of pain. I damped his lips with the corner of a clean gauze. Water is too ambitious for lungs that have decided to unionize. He focused on my face in segments, as if the blast had sorted me into manageable parts. "Nurse?" he ventured. I nodded. "Names are heavy. Titles travel better." "Good," he said, and I shall never spend a better word in my life. People make confessions to women in uniforms that smell of smoke. He gave me a few small coins of biography. A sister who hoarded postcards. A bicycle that always lied about its brake. A pub where the floor remembered beer with affection. I kept each coin and didn't ask for change. When the jerk of pain returned like a tax collector, I massaged his sternum with 2 fingers and breathed with him. 2 in, pause, 2 out, until the collector decided the hour was wrong. Around us the city resumed its ridiculous competence. Buckets clanged, the Austin coughed, a kettle announced opinions from somewhere you would expect theology. The lad stood sentinel with the face of a boy who has just met the border between trying and failing and decided to keep walking. "All right," I told him, without turning, "count for me." He did, numbers quiet as moths. At 30, I felt the pulse in the man's wrist write its last short sentence. It was an elegant sentence, stubborn and brief and absolutely sufficient. I saw it, I owned it, and I did not announce it. Announcements are for daylight. I folded the oilcloth higher, so the air would mind its manners. I smoothed his hair with the gloved back of my fingers because skin is for the living. We carried you. I told him, not you died, not you're gone, just the truth I could bear to put in the world at that hour. The vicar said the one line I always forgive the church for, the one about green pastures that feels like a real address when you've been walking burnt streets. The deacon tucked the man's hand under the oilcloth with a competence that would have impressed any matron. Then the job returned as jobs do. I wrote the time on the card the vicar held, the location, the note about morphine, and the words he didn't get to finish. I pinned the card where a clerk would find it and judge kindly. I took his button, only one, always one, not as a trophy but as a receipt. Someone carried him. It will live in my tin with the others until I am old enough to mistake it for luck. I stood, my knees loudly unamused, and the world rose with me in that dizzy way it does after you lend it too much strength. The lad met my eyes, learned the answer, and put his hand on the rail of the church as if it were my shoulder. Next, he asked, and I loved him for not adding please or why. We lifted the door again. The Austin revved her patience. Across the square, a whistle pecked 3 notes, collapse risk, and London, stubborn and bandaged, held our coats while we went back for whoever was arguing with smoke next. London is not a skyline. It's a choreography of hands. At Farthing Lane, the TQ and the bucket line shared elbows like cousins at a wake. A porter from the goods yard, cap askew, dignity intact, became my splint man, tearing lath into lengths while apologizing to carpenters living and dead. We'll put it on their tab, I told him, and he grinned a grin of a city that understands ledgers. A tramwoman in trousers rolled to her calves, grease on one shin like a medal, took charge of blankets with the authority only women who have wrestled ticket machines possess. She taught the new lad the blanket lift with corners bitten in, a faster way to become a miracle when your fingers are clumsy. Fold hope into the corners, she said, and I almost kissed her for the theology. A pair of bakers arrived carrying a board that still smelled of crust. We turned it into a carry sledge and pretended not to hear my stomach remember peacetime. Every trade arrived disguised as kindness. A tailor knotted triangular bandages as if basting a lapel, the knots set elegant at throats, doing their steady, unfashionable work. A priest with mud on his cassock learned to fetch and carry like any sensible angel. A violinist wrapped her instrument in oilcloth and surrendered her case as a box for dressings. Later, when the all-clear on someone else's horizon tempted foolish hope, she tuned one string and played us back into patience. We made a pharmacy from pockets, barley sugars from a grandmother's tin, aspirin from a woman who kept a chemist's drawer where others kept buttons, safety pins from every apron in the parish. Write their names, urged a clerk whose spectacles had lost an arm. Write some name. He lent me his pencil. We signed 1,000 temporary identities on scraps and cuffs and the inside of courage. At the corner, a publican poured tea from a battered urn as if he were pulling pints at closing time, voice carrying the music of normal. 2 sugars for shock, he intoned. 1 for saints, none for liars. And the queue obeyed because London prefers humor to orders. A bus conductor, promoted by catastrophe, directed traffic with a ticket punch like a marshal's baton. He put our Austin through with a flourish that would have cost a shilling on a better night. Hands found other hands and became machines. Doors off hinges slid under bodies with a sigh. Shutters, rebranded as stretchers, learned reliability. We built a small republic between the haberdasher's smoldering roof and the church's stern patience. The Constitution was simple. You lift, you press, you count, you pour, all of you stay. A child with freckles the color of new brick fetched water in a pudding basin and asked me whether heroes get days off. They're unionizing, I said, binding a wrist with the rhythm that makes pain nod off. He considered the politics of that and decided to join. I'll be on the tea committee, he declared, and when I told him that was the most powerful committee in London, he believed me with the solemnity of Parliament. In the middle of it, a man who had once sold hats took my elbow. Nurse, he said, my hands are useless unless someone tells them what they are. I looked. Soft palms, city fingers, shame trying to rent space. I put a dressing in those hands and pointed at a woman with a scalp cut pretending to be an ornament. Hold this like rain holds a roof, I instructed. He did, perfectly. as if all his life had been rehearsal for this useful minute. Around us, sirens rehearsed their next sentences. The sky cleared its throat of sparks. Our republic tightened its shoelaces and kept going. When people tell me London survived because of spirit, I nod and don't argue. But the truth is smaller and heavier. It survived because of hands. Not all help arrives tidy. A costermonger wheeled up with apples that looked guilty for being beautiful and told me to dose the blue-lipped with tartness. He was right. Sour wakes the throat. We quartered fruit with a knife that had recently fancied itself a chisel and let the smell cut paths through smoke. A seamstress tied slings from skirt linings with the contempt of a woman who has spent a lifetime rescuing men from their own buttons. She showed the lad how to anchor a wrist in a figure of eight that would hold while the world forgot. 2 dockers appeared with shoulders like solutions. I pointed them at a slab of fallen lintel pinning a man's calf. Lift on my count. I ordered, and the dockers, saints of leverage, brought the stone up angry and brief while I dragged the leg safe and slid in a shutter. The man tried to thank each of us individually. We gave him tea instead, the language with no tenses except now. Across the way, a grocer rated his own ration books for barley sugar and tins of milk. He wrote the theft in a ledger with the serene expectation that London would forgive him when it tallied up the night. The bus conductor, now our marshal of movement, found a whistle somewhere and began to choreograph the road. Handcarts left, lorries right, prams to the warm wall, ambulances through the center like bishops on a chessboard only nannies understand. He flagged down a taxi that had decided to be an ark and loaded 3 W patients with the authority of Parliament. Back by the half hour, the cabbie promised, and I believed him because London taxis have never lied to me in a crisis. At the parish corner, the violin case returned, empty and proud. Its owner had become a runner, thin shoes slapping out messages between our post and the next, water at Bartleby's yard, morphine nil, blankets owed to St. Jude's, pump leather split but mended with blasphemy. She leaned against the church railings, eyes bright with the education of fire, and I pressed a sweet into her palm as hazard pay. Play tomorrow, I said. Make the city remember it has a throat. She nodded like a musician taking a difficult tempo and went again. A man with a ledger asked me whether he should list the dead. Yes, I said, but also list the people who lifted them. He blinked, then understood. History owes wages to the living. He wrote Mrs. Doyle, bucket line lead, pen, roofs, tramwomen, blankets, boy with basin, tea committee, chair, and under that, small and in pencil, nurse, made us believe our hands were enough. I pretended not to see it. Compliments are drafty in a night like this, when fatigue tried its old trick, turning hands clumsy, speech sharp. The publican rang a spoon on the urn like last orders for despair. Change partners, he called, and we did. Lifters traded with pressers, carriers with pourers. The new lads swapped buckets for taking pulses under my eye. Rotation is mercy disguised as method. The queue for tea turned itself into a queue for usefulness. Even grief took a number and waited without rudeness. And then London performed one of its small, indecent miracles. A man I had sent away twice returned with a trolley cobbled from pram wheels and bed frame, stacked with clean pillowcases robbed from his mother-in-law's airing cupboard. For dignity, he said, and I forgave every mother-in-law in advance. We covered faces and futures both. Linen does more for courage than speeches do. The tramwoman tucked a corner with the same precision she once gave ticket stubs, and the air got easier to breathe for 20 yards in every direction. Somewhere to the east the sky rehearsed another insult. Our republic did not look up. We passed a bucket, lifted a door, tied a sling, wrote a name. The lad met my eye and gave me the smallest, most valuable nod in medicine. Still learning, still here. I answered with the only promotion that matters. Take charge of the blankets, I said. He stood an inch taller and became a person London could carry into tomorrow. Rain arrived the way London apologizes, late, thin, useful. It turned ash into paste and tempers into something you could shape. We slipped on courage more than once and laughed because the ground prefers that. The costermonger's apples went round again. Tartness woke the sulkers. Someone produced a tin of treacle like a conjurer, and we smeared it on crusts so shock would agree to stay for tea. Sugar is diplomacy. Bread is policy. Together, they make treaties between lungs and mourning. At the edge of our republic, grief stood on tiptoe, trying to be taller than work. A woman with her hair coming down asked me whether she should scream now or later. Later, I said, binding a forearm with a triangular that still smelled faintly of violet soap. It carries better over clean floors. She nodded, sincerely grateful for a schedule. The lad escorted her to the blanket station where the tramwomen, now omnipotent, issued wool and instructions with equal warmth. Mr. Penn limped in, soot mustache promoted to full beard, carrying a cat under his coat. Found him conducting on a ridge, he announced. We shared the laugh like contraband. The cat accepted promotion to mascot and began inspecting bandages with the disdain of experts. Even the priest smiled without permission. It is important to give the living silly things. It keeps the dead from using all your words. The bucket line faltered, hands blistered, spines remembering they were mortal. The publican banged his urn again. Change partners, he sang, and the dockers swapped to blankets while the hatter's clerk took a shovel and discovered he liked being necessary. The bus conductor redrew the road with his whistle and a pirouette. A lorry obeyed like a well-trained elephant. In that moment, I fell in love with London again, shamelessly, as if she hadn't already taken a decade off my knees. A messenger from the next parish skidded in with news sketched in breath. St. Jude's wants stretchers, water back on at Hoxton, morphine in Nell, doctor en route, but lost his temper and his bicycle chain. I wrote it in my head where the city keeps its ledgers and handed out orders that sounded like gossip. You, fetch 2 doors with hinges that look tractable. You, borrow pram wheels without getting stabbed. You, go to Mrs. Kelly's and lie. Tell her the vicar says she owes us 3 kettles. Lies are receipts when they're owed. We built 2 stretchers from doors and bed slats, lashed with neckties collecting redundancy pay. The seamstress supervised, needles stuck into her cuff like medals. Cross lash, she scolded the dockers, and the dockers, who could move docks, let a tiny woman rearrange their knots with the pleasure of men learning a better swear. The stretchers rolled out dignified as hearses and twice as hopeful. Then a small ceremony. The old woman with the clock brought it to me. Face crackled with heat, hands stopped at nothing in particular. For the hall, she said, so people can pretend time behaves. We set it on a chair under the church portico where rain couldn't bully it. Everyone who passed looked up and adjusted themselves an inch toward human. Time does behave if you bully it kindly. By the time the sirens remembered the shape of all clear in a neighborhood not our own, our street had chosen to practice it anyway. The fires had learned sulk. The smoke gave up its union. The bucket line disbanded itself into hugs disguised as practicalities. We did the unglamorous last rounds. Corners for embers, gutters for glass, door frames for the surprise heat that writes tomorrow's headlines. I signed 3 cards with names I hoped were right, and 1 with known to God, which is a clerk's way of swearing we tried. The Republic clocked off the only way it knows. Bad jokes, promises to meet at the same corner when the sky changes its mind, and a distribution of biscuits that would embarrass a better nation. I rinsed my hands in a bowl that had known Sunday puddings, dried them on a towel that had known babies, and looked at the lad, whose shoulders now belonged to someone I could trust with a roof. Chair of blankets, I said, pinning an imaginary medal. He saluted with a grin that had learned to live here. Across the square the Austin ticked as she cooled, a cat after mischief. We had done what hands can do. We would do more when hands woke again. For now, I wrote 3 words on the chalkboard at the post, under Mrs. Doyle's tidy list of roofs and mains and debts. People, still here. It is not poetry. It is the only line I believe. You don't hear a near miss until after it decides to be polite. First there's a vacancy in the air where noise should live, then a pressure that edits your ribs. Only afterward the sound catches up, like a drunk late to a brawl. We were halfway down Brushfield, arms full of blankets and doors and dignity, when the vacancy arrived. The city leaned. My mouth said down before my brain filed the paperwork. We folded behind a low wall that remembered being a garden once. The blast arrived a heartbeat later. Thump, then a long consonant through brick and bone. Dust turned the street into a drawing. The lad's hand found my sleeve, 2 squeezes. I'm here, and Mrs. Doyle's helmet kissed the paving next to my boot. A window across the way inhaled and forgot how to exhale. The glass took the night off and laid down in glitter. Timpani ears, that's what they call it when the world becomes wool under your hat. My right rang the key of wrong for 3 seconds, then sulked into a whine. The afterblast made its rounds, gutters coughing, doors reconsidering their hinges, cats writing letters to the editor. We did the inventory you learn after your third raid. Fingers, move, toes, present, head, cracked? No, bag, here, lad, yes, street, arguing but alive. Then the small sounds that tell you who didn't duck fast enough. Not screams, those come later, operatic and rude, but little complaints. A woman surprised, a pipe leaking its regret, the creak of timber trying to remember geometry. Taps off, Mrs. Doyle shouted, voice 3 notes lower than normal. Gas scares even brave women. The bus conductor, promoted to marshal by acclaim, sprinted for the curb stop and shut a valve with the authority of kings. I crawled to the edge of our ex-garden and looked. The near miss had dropped a house into an allegory, front peeled away, rooms showing their habits to the street, bed like a stage, chair faithful unto rubble, a picture frame hanging from insistence. A ceiling swung by one nail, indecisive as a politician. Whistles, I said, and 3 answered. Penn was already reading the roof with his shins. Concussion turns clever men into furniture. We found one sitting in a chair that had survived out of politeness, wearing a suit that had decided to be dust. His eyes tried to alphabetize the debris and got stuck at B. Blink for me, I asked, and his lids obeyed as if their union steward had approved. I checked the pupils, equal, sulking, and the pulse, that shy cat in the wrist. Present, annoyed. W tag and T. He'd forgive physics and himself in an hour. Beyond, under the indecisive ceiling, a boy whimpered in the register that makes nurses forget caution. Hold. I warned the ceiling, as if it respected democracy, and slid on elbows across a floor that had learned new traps. The boy had a cut that declarative, head wounds writing cursive, and a breath that had chosen a silly tempo. I wrapped my hand in the tail of my skirt, lifted the rotten joist enough to make an exit, and pulled him by the armpits into a life he had not yet decided to commit to. Am I dead? He asked, offended. Not with that haircut, I said, and he believed me enough to cry, which is a good sign in boys and some men. To our left, Timbers started the sentence roofs used to warn you. I was out. I barked, which is the rest of the sentence. We crabbed backwards, boy between us, and the ceiling finally chose a side and came down with a sigh that made poetry redundant. Dust did what dust does best and tried to make itself the main character. We sneezed, swore, laughed, in that order, laughing resets lungs. The lad tapped my shoulder. New signal, his invention, 2 quick and 1 slow. I'm dizzy but functional. Ears, I said, and he nodded. Timpani. I mimed the chew and yawn that pilots teach. Open the tubes, asked the world back in, and he copied, grimaced, and then grinned. Good, I said. Now be taller than your ears. He stood. The body is vain. Give it a posture, and it will try to live up to it. Gas again, a hiss in a language I don't like. The bus conductor waved, and 2 men with spanners argued the pipe into silence. A warden's whistle pecked 3, the collapse song, and we answered by moving our Republic 20 yards without losing a teacup. The near miss had taken the middle of the street hostage. We negotiated with detours and sarcasm. The aftershock business is bookkeeping. Who is ours? Who is still? Who must be loaned to the brigade or the undertaker? We finished what the blast had interrupted. The concussed gent got a blanket and the job of counting cupfuls for the frightened, which is arithmetic with dignity. The boy with the haircut received a bandage that made him look rakish. I told him not to waste it on the wrong girls. He promised to try virtue at least twice. Then my own hands started their rebellion, the trimmer that clocks in when the danger has already drawn its pay. I put them to work, the only cure. Doors off hinges, shutters to sledges, cross-lash with neckties because rope is at war elsewhere. The seamstress corrected my knot with a TSK I shall hear in the grave. Pretty matters, she scolded. Pretty holds. She was right. Neatness is grip. A neighbor I knew by his cough and not his name brought me a basin with 2 inches of clean water. For your eyes, he said, and I rinsed dust from lashes that had been trying to read the street. The world sharpened by a cruel, necessary degree. With clarity came the thing I'd been postponing. Check the team. I touched wrists as I passed. Pin, steady. Tramwomen, furious but singing. Mrs. Doyle, indestructible. The lad, green about the gills, standing anyway. Good. I told each wrist, because wrists enjoy praise more than faces do. We requisitioned 2 prams without asking Parliament. 1 wheel good, 1 argument, but they took doors like they were born to it. The bus conductor drew a new map in the dust with his ticket punch, arrows and all. A cab reappeared as promised, soaked in bravery. We filled it with 3 our tags and a prayer the size of shillings. Back in 10. The cabbie lied beautifully, which is what you want from men who wrestle streets for a living. Somewhere close, a piano found middle C and apologized for yesterday. The vicar rang the bell once, a mercy note, not a sermon. The city tasted itself, spat dust, and tried tea. My ears settled to a sulk. The lad leaned in, as if to confess. I thought I was going to run, he said. Then you said down, and I liked obeying. We all do, I told him, when the order makes sense. He squared his shoulders around that, and became the kind of man who will give orders sparingly. We marked the crater with chalk, UXB, check AM, because the brave are allowed to defer to daylight. I looked once more at the house that had turned itself inside out and felt that ache I keep for rooms. Tables that did their sums, chairs that held secrets, silly ornaments that were never silly to the people who dusted them. We'll wash your floor later. I promised a stranger's kitchen and meant it as a vow. Next street, Mrs. Doyle called, voice back in its proper key. The near miss had tried to make itself the whole story. It failed. We lifted, we counted, we moved, like blood finding a new route around a scar, and London showed us her old trick again, the trick of continuing. Paper is the first casualty after pride. The incident forms had gone to heaven twice already this week. Clipboards prefer peacetime. So we wrote where the fire couldn't eat. Cuffs, forearms, the smooth inside of coats, the underside of collars, the backs of hands if we had to. A clerk from the gas board, spectacles mended with hope, became my registrar again, pencil shaved with a rescue knife until it looked indecent. Names, he asked, then, gentler, or the names you want kept. People gave what they could, Annie of number 12, Mr. Shaw, Shop, Baby Tom, Blue Shawl, Mom. We pinned the slips where dignity could find them later. For the dead, we used linen tags stolen from a laundry that had already forgiven us. 1 thread through a buttonhole, 1 through the corner of a shroud that was really a pillowcase opened flat. I wrote careful, because neat letters are the last courtesy you can offer a body. Location, hour, who carried, who witnessed, any message that made it through the smoke. Till Nell the Dahlias came up. I kept the buttons, only 1, always 1. In my tin like receipts for debts the city will pay when it's sober. The living got codes that travel faster than prose. A triangle on a cuff, fracture, a small cross by the wrist, bleeder watched. A circle on the lapel with a dot, choker, oxygen given, OBS, cough and chop for the ones whose lungs told jokes. The tramwoman, chair of blankets, omnipotent, added her own embroidery. 1 knot in the corner for shock, 2 for find me later. We are a nation of knots now. At the post, Mrs. Doyle's board became scripture. She moved the chalk like a conductor. Mains, out/Hoxton, in, roofs, checked. 7, casualties moved. 23, dead, known. 4, dead, known to God. 1, underneath, smaller, the line she always writes on nights that want to be endless. Kettle, on. I added streets and a handwriting my schoolmistress would forgive. Brushfield, Farthing, Jude's Alley, small arrows for passable, a skull for the corner we will not trust until Tuesday. Hospitals want order even when order refuses the invitation. At the school hall, the intake desk, 3 desks cannibalized into 1, asked for names, injuries, treatments given, times. We delivered what we had, sometimes on skin, sometimes on the back of a biscuit tin lid. We'll copy, the matron promised, eyes already copying the room into a grid made of beds and willpower. She stamped each wristband with a number that would mean something to somebody in daylight. Numbers comfort clerks and the frightened. I have made peace with both. A boy arrived with a pocketbook caked in soot. Dad says write it down or it didn't happen, he declared. and began tallying. Buckets passed. Doors turned to stretchers, times the whistle pecked 3. I leaned over his shoulder and added a column he had not thought to keep. Who lifted whom? Porter Mr. Aziz, grocer. Dockers lintel man. Seamstress 5 slings, held. Boy with basin tea committee, chair, exemplary. History is a ledger with 2 sides, and the right-hand column is always hands. For the ones who couldn't tell their names and were not yet gone, we wrote find ME cards. Street, landmark, the sort of description Londoners respect. House with the bowling poster, door with 3 scratches, bay tree and dustbin. Runners took them to posts and vicars and the woman at the tram stop who knows everything and asked no questions tonight. Some came back with a tick, relative found, bed made at number 6, some with a line through, no survivors, some with a teacup ring and the word tomorrow. Tomorrow is a place you can put grief when your arms are full. In the church, the vicar and I made a little office on the font cover. Cards, pins, twine, the rubber stamp from some office that had lost its door. We stamped the card seen or sent, never done. Done is not a word for cities. A constable brought us a ledger page torn free. Mortuary provisional list, he muttered, miserable with procedure. And I copied our 4 known and 1 known to God in letters too careful for that hour. Under effects, I wrote what could be born. Ring, plain, handkerchief, initial J, button, receipt. The constable tipped his helmet to the button and left, gentler than he'd arrived. Messages breed in the small quiet after heat. A woman pressed a note into my palm with fingers that shook like clocks. Tell Mrs. Porter, milk, that the key is under the brick and the cat eats from the blue saucer. I wrote it larger, added Farthing Lane in a hand her neighbor would recognize, and sent the wren of a runner who knows which cats are liars. A lad in RAF blue, grounded, ashamed, brought me a list folded to the size of pennants. 3 names, 2 addresses, 1 apology. I put it under the Bible because the Bible likes being useful. We pinned a notice to the church railings with drawing pins stolen from a school map. If you are searching, go to the name board in the nave / if you are found. Leave your name twice. Once with US. Once with the publican / if you can write. Write for others / if you cannot. Say it to me. People came. People spoke. People wrote for hands that had carried water all night and had no letters left in them. Somewhere a violin tried a hymn and decided on home, sweet home. No one complained. I kept one last ledger only I will see. A hospital of sentences in my head. Man from the sash. Breath remembered soup. Sent with blankets to St. Jude's. Old woman with clock. Promoted to timekeeper. Smiled with 3 teeth and all the authority in the world. Boy with the haircut. Bandage rakish. Future loud. Told to try virtue twice. Baby. Steam burn cooled. Slept through the argument and woke with opinions. I add the dead there too, because they deserve better company than columns. Church steps. Morphine half. Good. He said, button taken, carried. At the end of the page, I always write the same 2 words in pencil, because ink feels too proud for them, not finished. We chalked the last marks before dawn smudged them. Arrows softer, skulls paler, the word safe tentative as a handshake. Mrs. Doyle closed the post ledger with both hands like a woman shutting a fine piano in a damp house. Go wash, she told me. I rinsed dust and ache at the pump that had finally remembered its job, dried my face on a towel that once knew baby powder, and slipped the button tin into my pocket. Records keep cities from lying to themselves later. Tonight, they kept me from lying to the living. Dawn pretended not to know us. It came in sideways, a pale shrug through soot, as if London had been misbehaving and morning didn't want to reward it. The lamps went out not by order, but by boredom, even fire tires. The bucket line dissolved into neighbors again, people with faces instead of helmets, hands suddenly shy without jobs. Our Austin ticked herself cooler and then sulked, as old machines do when they know they were brave and no one is clapping yet. This is the hour when counting matters more than courage. We made the rounds with a ledger you hold in your head and in your fingers. I walked Brushfield and its tributaries, writing a slow inventory on my bones. Windows that decided to stay, doors that had learned to lie down, roofs that were repentant but intact. We tapped stair treads with a broom handle and called up, "All right, love," to houses that answered in coughs and kettles. If a kettle boiled, the tally gained a saint. The school hall had become Triage in neat handwriting. Beds in rows, blankets pretending to be uniforms, the tea urn officiating from a little dais as if elected. The matron had drawn columns with chalk between cots, dressings, oxygen, keep, send, and move people between words with a cruelty that is just good sense. We checked our own, belly woman still holding the world's future at a reasonable angle. Blunted old gent asleep in a pose that promised to fight anyone who woke him. The baby with the steam kiss scowling at the notion of naps. The boy with the haircut wanted to get up and be useful. The matron made him important by insisting he do it lying down. Outside, clergy rang once. A modest bell, a vow not to be melodramatic. I washed my hands under a pump that remembered water at last, then poured some over my hair to talk the dust flat. The lad stood beside me like the kind of tree parks can trust. "Breakfast?" he asked, embarrassed by wanting. We split a crust tarred up with treacle and soot. He chewed like a person who had earned the right to like food again. The brigade finished their quarrels with the last honest flames and turned to their secondary profession, judging masonry. You see men's faces change when danger becomes paperwork. Courage shifts from shoulders to eyebrows. They chalked condemn on a house that had been indulged by gravity 1 hour too long and checked joist on another that might. With secrets and luck, see Tuesday. We followed behind with smaller chalk. Riding cat where a Tom had been seen sulking. TA where a widow boiled mercy. Quiet where grief had the floor. Distribution begins at first yawn. The grocer opened a ledger with wet pages and gave out tins to people whose hands he recognized, pricing everything at later. The publican ran a hose from his yard tap to fill buckets that no longer had opinions. Mrs. Doyle set up a card table under the church portico. Lost and found. People, pets, habits. We wrote names and descriptions with the ruthlessness of love. Mum, frown, not unkind. Tommy, putting basin hair, triumphant. Tabby, answers to nothing. And pinned them under a notice that said if you can write, do it for someone else. We returned kettles to women who have never asked for thanks in any language, and they thanked us anyway by pressing hard biscuits into our pockets, contraband hugs, and the sentences I hoard. I knew you'd come. I heard your whistle. I can do without the mirror, but not the chair. Chairs matter. I promised a carpenter from another parish would come and bully timber into obedience. He would, because carpenters hear promises faster than bells at dawn. The ARP post felt larger in daylight, and smaller, both. The dustbin lid gong looked like a joke again, the stirrup pumps like toys with ash in their hair. On the board, I added neat lines and foolish schoolmistress script. Casualties moved. 31. 2 hall. 17. 2 hospitals. 9. Kept home. 5. And underneath, because Mrs. Doyle says numbers without blessing are an insult. Kettle. On. Someone had already put it there. Good. Tradition earns itself, or it isn't worth a mug. The city began to rehearse normal. Buses rolled wrong routes with right intentions. A tram rang a bell at nothing in particular and felt better. A lamplighter, hours late and perfectly correct, checked hoods no longer needed and nodded to me like a man doing his small part of a very large chore. We escorted a line of walkers toward their workplaces through streets that had proposed new geography overnight. Watch your step, I said, and London watched itself. Then came the part one never perform well and never skip, letters. I sat on the church steps with my tin of buttons and wrote in the tidy hand my schoolmistress beat into me. 3 notes that were not what anyone wanted, all of them the best I could afford. He was carried. He died with a hand in his. He said good. I took a button, receipt. I added the parish and the hour and that there was tea. Tea in a letter is a rope across an impossible gap. The near-miss house had cooled into a lesson. The gentleman who had been furniture insisted on finding his wife's postcards. We found her box under a chair leg, the top card a view of Brighton pretending to be summer. He held it like a passport. She'll want this, he said with the optimism of men who accept the universe's bad behavior but hope for paperwork to fix it. She will. I lied, respectfully. We released the volunteers from their war back to their trades. The tramwoman became a conductor again, trousers rolled, issuing tickets with a new softness like a bandage under the words. The dockers went to docks having already moved more than ships. The bus conductor hung his whistle on a nail and picked up a punch as if nothing had happened. which is how cities do miracles without bragging. Mr. Penn, roof sage, promised to mend a child's boot by noon because heroism is no excuse for shabby cobbling. The lad and I walked the last 100 yards of our parish, chalking safe for now on doorsteps that had earned it. CUS where pride would prevent requests. At the corner, the cat saluted us with its tail and forgave the sirens for existing. I wrote the day's final line in my head ledger. Dawn over blackout. We kept more than we lost, and we will argue the difference later. Then I put my back against the post wall and let my knees remind me I am mortal and also permitted to sit. You measure a night not in fires, but in chairs. How many people ended it sitting upright with a mug and a future? By that arithmetic, we broke even, which, in Blitz terms, is a kind of glory. Still, there are buttons in my tin that have started to learn each other's names. I let them. The dead deserve company, and the living deserve truth. We did not save enough. We never will. We saved what could be carried and taught the rest to wait for us in a place where we can't yet go. I walked back to the church one more time because grief is a parishioner and insists on being greeted. The vicar had written prayers at 9. T now and I approve of his theology. The deacon read names to the font, which keeps confidences better than pillars do. I added 4 to our ledger, 2 with addresses, 2 with directions that only London understands, by the iron railings with 3 curls, corner where the baker whistles off key. The matron took the cards, and with them my temper, and filed both tidily. What we saved: a baby who will scowl through school and win medals for stubbornness, a boy with a rakish bandage who will become a man who counts buckets before boasting, a woman's hands that still know how to pour tea for neighbors, a clock that will not keep time but will keep courage, a cat who will supervise knitting and never chase sparks again. And we saved the new lad, no longer new, whose shoulders now carry London like a good coat. He has learned our grammar: sleeve, wrist, cheek. 2 squeezes, I'm here, down when I say it. Breathe like soup. Count for me. Next, you will make other people brave by accident. What we didn't: a man who said good, which is a word I would like to outlaw for dying because it makes the rest of us feel forgiven too easily. We did not save the first violin of a woman who will play again anyway. We did not save the perfect corner of a kitchen where sunlight used to stand in the mornings like a child waiting for toast. We did not save some private jokes. London will grow new ones, indecent and necessary, but tonight I am allowed to miss the old. There is a ledger I never show, the one where I debit and credit myself. Half an ampoule when a whole would have been kindness. Credit. He spoke. Debit. He didn't finish. Sent the belly woman first. Credit. 2 pulses saved. Debit. Someone waited who shouldn't have. But then London walks by and settles my accounts without asking. A tramwoman presses a biscuit into my palm as if paying wages. A cobbler promises sols for our parish like tithes. The publican sets an enamel mug in my hand with the gravity of sacraments. Balance of a sort. I open the button tin and let them clink. 1 plain, 1 carved, 1 with a chip like a birthmark, 1 still warm because grief holds heat. I do not count them where anyone can see. Counting is a private verb after dawn. I sew 1 onto the inside hem of my apron because I dislike the mathematics of loss being only subtraction. A button attached to cloth is more than a receipt. It is a promise to keep showing up while there is thread. The lad sits beside me on the post step, elbows on knees, helmet crooked in a way that will make some girl write poems. Do you remember them all? He asks, not looking at me. Enough, I say, which is the most honest answer available. He nods, relieved to be in a profession that does not worship perfect memory. We remember like London, in routes and corners and the smell of streets after rain. Mrs. Doyle appears with the ledger and a pencil that has become her scepter. Sleep, she orders, which is the one command nurses crave and disobey. I will when the kettle admits defeat. I bargain. It doesn't. Kettles are heroes with handles. She tucks a loose hair into my cap, a gesture older than bombs, and returns to her board where she writes, extravagantly, and in underlined chalk, volunteers, thanked. None of us believe in the past tense, but it warms the doorframe. When I finally walk home, the city has dressed itself in daylight badly, skirt tucked into knickers, hairpins at war with intent. I pass the house we amputated and it looks relieved, as patients often do after a hard decision. The old woman's clock sits in the portico under a new sign, time, temporary. People check it and straighten themselves for no reason other than habit. Habit is a kind of courage. At my door, I take the long breath you hold for no one else, the one that empties the basement of your ribs. The kitchen has learned a new smell, smoke and tea, and something like victory, thin but present. I hang my coat on the chair that hasn't failed me yet and set the tin beside the kettle. The cat from Pin's roof arrives uninvited and assumes rights. I pay the toll in saucer milk and the privilege of being inspected. I write the last note, the one that costs, and address it to a name that will know the handwriting before the postman does. He was carried. His hand was held. He said good. I add London remembers because it is both boast and promise. I seal it with the kind of decision that keeps women upright for decades. Then I sleep, not heroically, but like a person who has lent the city both hands and is owed 4 hours. The sirens will come again, because men with maps will decide so. We will answer, because women with kettles already have. When they ask me, years from now, what we did, I will tell them something small and heavy enough to survive travel. We knocked while the street was on fire. We carried the dying out of the flames. We taught our hands new verbs, and we wrote the receipts on skin and stone. And when morning refused to clap, we put the kettle on and did the sums.